went to heaven briefly, was kind of shown around. He met Christ himself and basically was told that you need to go back because, like other people, some people we've chosen to send back, you need to spread the message in the word in terms of, what's going on in the world, and that, the powers that be, if you will, are not very happy, and that they're coming soon. There's a lot of people out there over the years, thousands and thousands, that have died and come back. Either these people are crazy or liars, or they're telling the truth. You just got to wonder.
I think that the thing that we talked about this before. I think the thing you're not the human brain. It's kind of like the analogy I'll use is it's kind of like all these colors come flying at you, but your brain can't process all these colors, so it interprets it the best it can. So maybe it really wasn't red, but you translate it to red when really it was some color that's never been seen before. So I think that when these type of things happen, like dreams, are dreams real? I mean, the dream itself is real, but when we are doing things in dreams, it's our brain trying to process information, right?
So I suppose that's one way to look at it.
Yeah. So
people that believe a little differently.
Yeah, I don't know everything, but I do not believe that those people actually
died and came back.
Well, they might have died and they might have come back, but I don't think that they saw God when they died. Absolutely not. I think that that's their way to interpret it.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of liars out there who will tell this story for attention. Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely. And how are you going to vet that one? How are you going to? It comes down to a person's credibility, and I think credibility is less and less these days in people.
Maybe, yeah. I guess in that case, I don't know.
And I really, whether they came back or not, that should have zero bearing on what you do with your life. Some random dude is going to tell me something. You know what? It's like any other information. It's like me calling you up and saying, "Hey Dan, make sure you go out and buy Google today." Well, are you going to run out and buy Google? Same thing with this guy who saw whoever. Yeah, I'll listen to the story and I'll evaluate it. But now if I knew somebody who had given me a stock idea, let's say somebody like my brother. My brother had given me certain stock tips that had proven very successful. So when he tells me, "Hey, you need to look into this," I'm gonna look into it.
Yeah, because he's credible and proven, right?
Yeah, he has a track record of being correct. Now he's not always correct.
Of course not.
So I do my homework, and if I agree with it, but the thing that he does is there's so many stocks out there. It would be a full-time job. So think about all these stories that you've read, whether it's the Bible or whether it's through history, whatever. And you read these stories, or you see a movie, or you see a show, and they describe a scenario. Like, for example, we read about World War II, right? And when you read about World War II and you saw like the different moves that were going on, it's history. You appreciate it because you're reading about it, but we didn't live it. So history is happening every day, but everybody has an opinion on it, and there are going to be people who are right and people who are wrong. Like, for example, Peter Schiff, right? He says it's going to collapse. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. And Max Kaiser, and then Paul Craig Roberts.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, all those guys are telling people this is what's coming, and you better be prepared for it. Now, in 2 years, if they were right, people are going to look back and say, duh, everybody's going to claim that they knew about it. But when you're in the heat of the battle, that's the time. That's what determines who's really good and who's not. Any asshole can talk about, well, if Hitler had done this, or if Eisenhower had done this.
You're right. Yeah.
A lot easier when you're looking back. But right now, most people out there think that there's nothing wrong with this world or this economy.
That the U.S. stock indices, as well as a lot of them around the world, are higher than ever before, and that the U.S. economy is growing supposedly at around a 2% growth rate, but everybody else globally is sucking wind, and they're asking why.
Well, I don't think people will like the answer if they find out why. I think there's a lot of manipulation going on. Like we talked about, when you start saying that hamburgers count as manufacturing, well, okay, great, yeah. Manipulate those numbers. Well, so when you compare it to manufacturing 40 years ago, when they weren't counting making hamburgers, and you say that growth has actually gone up, well, you're liars. Well, we're almost too big now.
Yeah, I think the system is so big now, so complex, so convoluted, so rigged. Like you take the mortgage derivatives from 6 years ago, right? The financial experts that were even selling them didn't even know fully what they were comprised of. Nobody knew.
That's a lie,
But they were making money hand over fist, that's all. And then when it all collapsed, everybody was wondering why.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem with that is, in my opinion, based on what I've read and what I've seen, the guy, J.P. Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, they should be taken out and have their heads cut off. They really should. Because they knew that they were selling garbage.
Right. And it would be a matter of time.
And they were selling it as the analogy. There was this article in Rolling Stone, and the guy used the analogy where, okay, I sell you a lemon with 100,000 miles on it, and I put a new coat of paint on it, and I sell it as a new car. How are you going to do due diligence? Because it was here's one of your favorite terms that you're going to appreciate. Those banks. And that's a whole nother problem, is we're letting these banks be investment companies and asset managers, and they start robbing Peter and Paul because, hey, it's only business. But here's something you'll appreciate. These banks and these investment companies, they don't have any fiduciary responsibility. Their attitude is, if I'm making money and you lose money, oh well, it's win-lose today, but musical chairs. If you're as long as they're sitting in the chair with the money, if that means everybody else, that means 100 million people have to be living in the streets. Tough for you.
The unemployment rate, like you brought up 100 times, is a great example. They have the audacity to tell us 6%.
Yeah. Okay,
really 6%? When you've got 50 million people on food stamps? How's that? 6%?
Well, how many people do you know who don't have a job? I mean, I think we're insulated up here because our region tends to do better than the rest of the country. But I can tell you, when I drove across the country last year,
it's decimated.
It was disastrous.
Yeah, you know why? Our region tends to do better because our region isn't based on as much as other regions are brick and mortar type companies. It's based on
schools and hospitals.
It's based on intellectual property and information based banks. finance,
Yeah.
insurance, technology,
Right.
medicine, etc. And not to say that those areas can't be farmed out either. I mean, even in medicine, as you know, they farm out the X-rays and all that. They send to India back and forth. So even in those industries, they're farming out what they can. But there's a level of expertise as well that at least for the time being that's been insulating us. So I think you're right in terms of the region. Detroit's a great example, right? What you said it the other day, a great example where 50, 60 years ago, whatever, World War II, whatever, Detroit was a booming metropolis, gleaming metropolis, right? Now the irony, it's like falling down, it's in shambles, and then its counterpart, so to speak, with the war, Hiroshima is the complete opposite now. It's amazing how things can change over time, go from a peak to a low, and depending on the decisions or lack of decisions you choose to make. You really got to get 50 miles, 80 miles outside of Boston, like you did, to really start cutting your costs, right? If you're anywhere in the Boston area, forget it. It's a zoo. New York area, same thing. The United States in general, okay, it's an expensive place to live. It's expensive.
Maybe that's why people are leaving the country.
Yeah. That's why you've got expats that were 7 million, they're 9, 10 million now and growing, right? People reach a point where it's like, well what am I doing? What am I killing myself for? 2 jobs. I don't see my wife. I don't see my kids. The American family's disintegrating. And all I do is pay taxes. What are we doing?
They may dream about doing something to lower their tax bill, but in the end they say, well, if I'm going to make a few $100,000, then I'm going to end up paying a lot of taxes. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, does anybody ever start saying wants and needs when it comes to the government? I mean,
yeah.
The government, all the government is today is Robin Hood. That's it. And they're going to start taking more and more. And people will come back and say, well, at the beginning of the 1900s, the tax rate was 90% for a while. Yeah, that's fine. I'll bet you that really was an incentive to go out and work, wasn't it? Even now, when the government is taking, let's say it's even 30%, why should the government take 30% of your money?
That's a lot of money.
And that's just the federal.
Yeah. That's just federal. So now you're going to be like Sweden, 50, 60% if we're not careful. What's the point?
Well, the other thing...
but in Sweden, I'm sorry, pardon me, in Sweden, we all get health care.
Yeah, that's what they'll tell you.
We get seven weeks of vacation, and they even wipe my snots.
Well, here's the thing that people never think of. Okay, that loaf of bread that you bought, the gallon of milk you bought, the gas that you put in your tank, what percentage of that has a tax in it? A fuel tax, a labor tax,
yeah, you're right.
Right? I mean...
Get tapped everywhere.
And
so many places you can't even keep track of it.
Well, you mentioned, how much do we do ourselves? Well, we don't. But that shirt that you're mentioning, well, the guy who, made the raw materials had to ship that to a processor, and the processor had to ship it to a distributor, and, all those pieces of the puzzle, not only do they add value to the final end of the product, but they add costs. And each layer of cost has its own layer of taxes. So that dime that was paid at the very beginning, well, in the end, it might be $1 and you're the one paying for that in the end because you bought it.
Well, at the end of the line consumer, right?
Because if I'm a manufacturing and I'm being taxed, that goes into my cost of goods sold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, and see, those are hidden taxes, and that's why. This is why I think things are out of control, because there's so much money in government now. There's zero chance that it can be controlled or regulated. Zero, zero. There's so much corruption and so much waste because there's so much money there. And that's why they should just knock it to zero, because I don't think there's any good solution. But I think that I would rather have charities and local groups and local people taking care of their own rather than relying on the state or federal government to do it for them. Why do you think this country is so messed up today? Why?
I agree.
Because why do I need to do that? They can go to the Salvation Army, or they can go to the government, or, it used to be churches and local groups that did this. And that's why we have the society. I mean, how many of us even know our neighbors today?
That's very true. Myself included.
Yeah, when my father grew up, they lived in a 3-family in Boston, and basically their family was on one floor. I think the grandparents were on the first floor, they were on the second floor, and then an aunt was on the third floor. They took up the whole 3 family between the family. And then families did the same thing across the street or next door, and it was all one big neighborhood. And if his mother, if somebody else, if Mrs. Jones next door saw him doing something wrong, well, people wouldn't just ignore it. It was a community.
They would report it, so to speak.
Or they'd punish the kid themselves.
And they would be supportive. Today, can you imagine punishing some kid that wasn't yours?
No, they'd be in jail or shot to death.
Look at teachers in classrooms now. There was a time where if you looked at the teacher the wrong way or cross-eyed, boom. The teacher had control of the classroom. That's not the case anymore. Teachers are afraid because they're not supported. I'm telling you, our value system, just no doubt in my mind. I mean, that's our society. We are a violent-ass society. And this is what it all boils down to.
But people put up with it.
I don't care what anybody says. I don't know how we got here, but we did. Every problem we have, in some way, shape, or form, you've heard me say this, can be traced back to the family, which is disintegrating. End of story. Anything goes now in our society. I mean, even the government, in terms of morality, in terms of work ethic, what it supports and what it pushes, all these people on food stamps, all these people on welfare. I mean, what is that promoting? What kind of ethics and values? And then the kids that are born from these people, what do they learn?
Well, here's the spooky thing. Now I don't know this for a fact because I'm not on it, but I keep hearing that a lot of these people pass down this lifestyle choice from generation to generation. So
that's my point.
Here's the real stickler is if the number of people have grown to 50 million people, how many more professional welfare people are we now creating?
There was probably a point in a proverbial sense where it was a triangle shape, where the base of the triangle, you had the bulk of the people right up through the middle of the triangle, whatever, if you will, had these values in ethics and in strong family units and stuff like that. It supported maybe a vast minority, if you will, at the top. I think that triangle now, just to analogize it, has since been pretty much inverted or turned upside down, right? I think now it's not a triangle like this anymore, but it's shaped like this now, where at the bottom of it, you've got people like you and me that are the minority, right? That are supporting this big wobbly monstrosity. That, guess what, Dave? Sooner or later, if you keep chipping the base out, what's going to happen to the monstrosity? It's going to fall over. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I would say if you live in the city, you might have a better chance of seeing it. But when If you live in an affluent suburb, you may not see this.
So for the people that have their head in the sand or don't care, you've heard me use this term before. The barbarian may not be at their gate literally, but he's closing in on them too. They just don't see it. They don't know it.
No.
So, this is what I've learned through scriptures and faith, that just because you don't understand something, just because you don't see something, just because you may not acknowledge something or believe something is what it is, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We live in a society now, and our Congress is a great example, where they don't reach across the aisle and work with each other anymore. Because it's like, hey, Dave, you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. You're just wrong. I'm not even going to reach across the aisle and see what you think, to see what kind of ideas you have, to see if we have any common ground, because I don't see it. It's not happening. Even though it's probably there, I'm just not acknowledging it because for whatever reasons. You remember the Fram oil filter commercial back in 1978? It was a great commercial.
Pay me now or pay me later.
Monkey mechanic, and he was standing there with the little oil filter. He's like, "You can pay me now," and I feel like that's where that's what we're doing. I feel like we're being penny wise and pound foolish. Just one man's opinion through kind of what I see, kind of what I observe.
Let's say that things continue as they are, and cities like Manchester, where I am, continue to spiral down, and cities like elite, like the rich cities like Lexington and Hingham in Massachusetts, they're going to become more isolated. Okay, but those people will continue to live their lives without really they're not going to be as impacted.
Well,
they'll end up paying more taxes, but they still will be able to, go out to dinner every night. They'll be able to go to the shows. They'll be able to put their kids in private schools or do whatever they need to do. Right? I mean, do you see that coming to an end? I mean, people think the Great Depression. Well, how bad was the Great Depression really? I mean, even if unemployment was 22, 23%, that means a majority of the people were working. It's like the Gulf War that's been going on for 10 years, 20 years. How many of us have been impacted by that? Most people don't even think of it. But then there are some poor people who have lost everything.